Hey everyone, what's up? How's it going? This is Finite MTG, and today I am bringing you all something a little different. So this is a mystery booster draft. It's a deck that I had actually just last night at a local game store that I went to. Had a ton of fun with this one. Drafted very greedily, as you probably could tell from that title and thumbnail. And here just to talk to you a little bit about this deck. It was a ton of fun to play. And this image isn't the best quality, so I'll go into what all is in this deck. I'll start just by talking a little bit about the deck, and then I'll get into the matches, and then I'll actually touch on the mystery booster experience itself. All right, so first thing to note here is I have, I think, 11 playtest cards that I drafted. I took so many playtest cards, and I wasn't really planning on playing them. So this event was pretty expensive for me to enter. I don't really play in paper, didn't have any store credit or anything like that. And so this was not, really a small decision for me to enter at this point. So I was getting super, super greedy, not just with my deck building, but with my drafting. So just took all these playtest cards up here. I think a good thing was my pack one, pick one. And I was pretty sure I wasn't going to play it no matter what. And then from there, you can see things just kind of went downhill. 3 mana 1/5, 1 mana 0/3. This card is pretty interesting. I think you could probably get away with it in a deck that's heavier blue, and then lazier goblins actually just good. And of course, I do have a number of playtest cards that did end up making my deck here, and I'll get to those eventually. I do have one rare draft, if you will, even though this card's a common. That was also motivated by price in that Lotus Petal. But yeah, beyond the Lotus Petal, most of my picks were either supposed to get me to some kind of cohesive deck, or they were just playtest cards. So yeah, basically I was looking up prices for the playtest cards during the draft. I don't know if that's really a cool thing to do. Probably doesn't matter very much because I think most of the prices are going to crash because so many of these packs are being opened, but decided to try to go for that anyway. You never know in a few years like whether some of these cards will be pretty expensive. Could definitely see them being collector's items, but pretty much I spent most of pack one taking playtest cards. Like I think I took maybe 5 or 6 playtest cards in pack one. And so that means I took like zero real cards for those picks. I wasn't reading signals. I was just passing great cards. I passed like Icy Manipulator, which you just have to be so silly to pass that card. Passed a bunch of other good stuff. I passed a Shriekmaw, very, very sad. Toward the beginning, I was thinking, okay, so I do have a couple black playtest cards. I do have a good thing if I want to try to do that. And I have Frogkin Kidnapper, which is kind of based on PV's card. The 2 and a white 3/1 flyer that exiles something and then costs 2 more to cast from exile. This one's a little bit different. It's just a 2/1 on the ground, and your opponent can pay 3 at any time to return the card from exile to their hand. So not quite as strong. And then this one, I'll be coming back to that in a second, but looks pretty innocuous. 1 and a black 1/1 flyer, but when it attacks, its power gets pumped for each locus you control. And of course, it itself is a locus. So if I'm not mistaken, like Cloud Post and all that stuff, I think those are locuses, loci. I don't actually know what the plural of that is. I'll have to double check. But if that is the case, that'd be kind of sweet. And so yeah, from there, basically just taking a bunch of playtest cards, kind of train wrecking my own draft here, thinking, okay, well, maybe I end up with some playable black cards because, I do have some of these black playtest cards. I was thinking maybe I end up in white. I had this Apostle's Blessing, which is really colorless, but I also ended up picking up Zealous Strike, in addition to a good thing. And I was thinking, okay, well, you know, maybe that happens. And then pack 1, I also had like a Lay of the Land, and maybe like a Kavu Primarch or something along those lines. So I did have some green cards as well, but that's pretty much what pack 1 looked like for me. And then pack 2, things started getting a lot more complicated. So I started picking up green cards, and I believe mostly just took green and black cards in pack 2. So I decided to give up on the white, which was a very good choice, as it turned out, and ended up getting like a late Obelisk Spider, which was a very nice card for me. I think I got the Birds of Paradise in pack 2. Took it over a Mishra's Bauble, which is another card that would have been pretty expensive, kind of like that Lotus Petal. But I think the Birds was worth it. Drew it 0 times actually in the matches, but pretty comparable in price, and the card is really good in my deck, especially because my mana is so greedy. Yet another way this deck is very greedy here, so get into that soon. I was set up after pack 2 to be some kind of green-black deck. I picked up, I think, a couple blue flyers toward the end. So Niblis of Dusk, you can't really read that, but let's see if we zoom in, if that becomes legible. Not really. Well, 2 and a blue for 2/1 flyer Prowess, I believe. And then we have Ghost Ship, a classic, 2 and double blue for a 2/4 flyer with Regenerate for triple blue. Guess triple blue is a cost you could play in a deck with the Jasconian Isle here. And I think I also picked up Living Death in pack 2. And so at that point it felt like I had to play black, because Living Death is just an absurd magic card. And I think at that point it was easily my most powerful card, playtest or otherwise. But then pack 3 things started getting complicated. So I believe pack 3 pick 1, it was one of these guys. It was either Luvac or Squidnapper. I think it might have been Squidnapper. And at this point, again, I'm just taking cards because they're playtest cards. So I didn't think it was going to end up in my deck at all at this point. And just trying to get some more value out of this pretty expensive event. And then I think I ended up picking up that Luvac in pack 3 as well. And then somehow I got an opportunity, and I think if I recall correctly, this card actually wheeled. I don't remember whether it was in the Squidnapper pack, like pack 3 pick 1. But when you wheel an opportunity, I mean that, you know, some question marks come up for sure. Because I was trying to play green-black. I thought, okay, maybe I'll splash Luvac. Like, I do have Birds, I do have Lay of the Land. Pack 3, I believe I picked up that Farseek as well. But Opportunity, I already had a late Opportunity in my last Chaos Draft video, I believe. So we already know how good it is, how much I like it. Just always surprised to see it go late, and it should just never wheel. I don't really know what happened for that to work out, but it did. So suddenly I'm thinking, okay, maybe I do drop the black. I have green mana fixing, and I have some decent green creatures, and I have a couple blue flyers. So yeah, maybe I'm able to end up base green-blue, and I'll splash the black. But then I start looking at this Living Death. I just couldn't really figure it out because this card is just so strong. I didn't want to splash black because then I just miss out on like possibly the best card in my deck at this point. I'm just kind of all over the place. I know I'm base green. I'm straddling blue and black. And that's basically how things turned out. So we did get a little bit more mana fixing. We got that Noxious Bayou. I think I got that one in pack 2 as well. And this card was actually great for me. So black-green dual land, basically. No, you can't search for it with Lay of the Land or Farseek. But enters untapped, produces black or green, and makes you get poison counters, which it's not really a resource that's being taxed in this game. Or at least in this format so far as I've seen. And so I got up to, I think, like 7 poison counters just by tapping that Noxious Bayou a bunch of times. And that was after people said it would never be relevant. So they were right. I, played that one, I think, like turn 2 and cast like a black 2-drop with it. But even if you're tapping it a bunch of turns in a row, it's very, very difficult to kill yourself with Noxious Bayou. That card's great. I don't think it'll turn into a black bordered card anytime soon. Maybe in some kind of kooky like Commander product or something like that, but probably not. But yeah, now I'll start talking about just how the deck ended up getting built, and then how it ended up performing. So I had picked up some of those blue cards, like I mentioned, really insane blue cards in Pack 3. There's one pick, I don't remember what it was against, but I was considering Kiora's Follower, or something that I would have been able to play if I ended up green-black. Because Kiora's Follower, I mean, as a blue-green 2-drop, if I'm splashing blue here, not really the kind of card I want to put in my deck, right? But there it is anyway. And you might have noticed here that the number of islands and swamps is actually the same. So sure, I do have one more black source here. But this isn't your traditional splash with 4 islands and 4 swamps. So here I ended up basically just going for maximum greed, which again, I've just been doing the whole time. And without really enough playables, after taking all these playtest cards, I mean, again, some of these playtest cards are very, very strong. Some of them are in my deck. But just bombed a lot of picks on cards, hoping that they'll be valuable eventually. So there's not really too much here going on in my sideboard. I have like Caustic Caterpillar and Azuri's Archers as like real sideboard cards. And then I have a few like main deckable options down there. I was originally going to try to main deck Vampire Hexmage until I realized the mana did not work out at all. And Walking Corpse was another potentially more castable option than Kiora's Follower. Not really interested in the rest of these though. And so I decided that I did have enough fixing between dual land here, birds, the Lay of the Land, and the Farseek. The other thing is I do have Sunset Pyramid, which is a nice form of card advantage that can help me set up my draws. Not going to say the same for Opportunity. I think by the time you get to 6 mana in this deck, not to mention double blue, it's not really mana fixing anymore. But I will say that Kiora's Follower is a lot more like mana fixing than you would think. So we do have 2 appearances here of double blue and of double black. And Kiora's Follower turns single blue into double blue or turns single black into double black. So that card was actually pretty relevant for me. I think I used it to cast Opportunity at least once. Not to mention the ramp is always going to be good. And with a heavy Arbalest in my deck too, there is some combo potential there. I think that was the point where I decided I couldn't really resist, because this thing does prevent a creature from untapping, and if you're just able to use Kiora's Follower, basically just saved yourself like the re-equip mana. So that's a pretty strong interaction. Compelling reason to include the card, even though it's not exactly what I want to do here. And yeah, one thing you might notice about this deck is there's virtually no removal. When you're taking playtest cards over like good removal spells and other interactive spells, that's kind of how things end up going. But somehow we still got a bunch of really strong cards here. Almost nothing was just plain, like we have... Here we have Dead Reveler, which I boarded out a bunch of times, sometimes for a land, sometimes for like Azuri's Archers or even Territorial Baloth. Kavu Primarch was vanilla 3/3, like almost every game. There's like one game where it was a 7/7. The Convoke mattered some of the time though, which was nice. And then Thornhide Wolves, really nicely sized, but yeah, once again, vanilla creature in this format. Somehow I ended up with a Rancor. I don't know how I picked that card up. I guess green was pretty open. If it hadn't been, then I would have been in a lot of trouble. The Obelisk Spider held the ground super well. Like 3 mana 1/4 reach is already a decent defensive body, but this ability here, putting counters on creatures after like they deal combat damage, kind of turns it into a 3-mana 2/4 reach, and that's like a pretty frustrating body for opponents to attack into. So I was pretty happy with just a lot of the cards that I ended up getting late in this draft, but some of the more absurd ones would definitely be these two blue playtest cards that I believe I picked up in pack 3. So I'll talk a little bit about each of them. So you have first Luvac, the Aberrant. So 4-mana 3/4, looks tame so far, but it says protection from modified creatures. So anything with a different power, toughness, or ability than it would be printed with. So in this format, I mean, that could be like anything. Obelisk Spider can modify stuff. Something with Unleash is going to be modified. Hunter of Eyeblights is going to be modified. Something with counters on or Monstrosity. This thing is modified when it attacks. I mean, there are just so many ways for things to be modified. You modify something by casting Apostle's Blessing on it. So really just almost everything. And then importantly here, you have this nice synergistic trigger. So at the beginning of each player's end step, you may put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that player controls. So I never actually used this on any of my opponent's creatures, but I did use it on mine to really, really good effect. Just turning itself into a 4/5 at the end of your turn is very strong. But another card that I drew this card almost every game, was Swarm of Locusts. So 2-mana 2/1 flyer, effectively when attacking. Not the most powerful Magic card ever, but these cards have always been good in limited. Solid clock and a good rate. And then once you start dumping some +1/+1 counters on them, then suddenly it's actually a pretty real threat. Definitely one of my few ways to win a game evasively. One thing that was kind of sad about picking up this Luvac is that I had even more synergy with it than you might have guessed. So here is Hunter of Eyeblights. It's a 5-mana 3/3, and it says when it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you don't control. And then for 2 and a black, you can tap it to destroy target creature you don't control with a counter on it. So this is also going to be very good against opponent stuff with Unleash. It's going to make the Obelisk Spider a little bit better. But it's really, really a sick combo with the Luvac, because at the beginning of your opponent's end step, you can put a counter on one of their creatures and then immediately destroy that creature with the Hunter of Eyeblights, which is just such a strong interaction. Really wish I got to do that once, but I was pretty happy with both of those cards. Hunter is a card that can definitely blow you out if it gets killed before you can activate it, because then you just basically put a +1/+1 counter on your opponent's creature and then your card didn't do anything else. But it was pretty impressive for me. Made my opponents make some awkward decisions, and always happy about cards like that. Next up here, I will talk about Squidnapper. So Frogkin, Kidnapper, I guess kidnappers in general here, are going to use the Ransom ability in the Mystery Booster format. So Squidnapper, 5-mana 3/4, when it enters the battlefield, you gain control of target creature and opponent controls until Squidnapper leaves the battlefield or until that player pays the ransom. And the ransom is 6 generic and 2 life. And so how that works, basically it's important to note that it is not an activated ability. If it were an activated ability, that means you could respond to it. So let's say I had some way to sacrifice a creature, or some way to, interact with creatures in general, bounce spell, removal spell, stuff like that. Then I could use that before the ransom actually resolves. But because the ransom is not an activated ability, the ransom is actually a special action. What that means is the second my opponent pays 6 mana and 2 life, they get the creature back. And they can do that at any time. And like I said, there's nothing I can do to respond, unfortunately. So that is something to keep in mind. Basically, as I pointed out, there are ways to make Squidnapper much better, things like sacrifice outlets, but my deck simply didn't have any, so that wasn't as relevant for me. But it could be relevant for you, so I thought I'd point it out. And yeah, this card is really, really great. It's a lot like Sower of Temptation. 3/4 makes it a little bit harder to kill. No, it doesn't have evasion, and it is a little more expensive, but it's a very strong Magic card. Really good tempo swing, if nothing else, and usually 5 mana 3/4 that sort of takes an extra turn, or maybe just puts your opponent in a spot where they can't win, is going to be very strong. Some of the time, I would cast this, and my opponent just would be on like 4 lands or something like that, and they're just staring down this thing knowing they can't get their creature back. It also didn't die to removal very often. That's something you might be concerned about in general, like instant speed removal on the Squidnapper to get the creature back, but I don't think that really came up. So yeah, now that I've talked about playtest cards a little, I'll try to talk about the matches. It's going to be hard for me to summarize everything. But basically, round 1 I'm not going to talk very much about. I was playing someone who's pretty new to Magic, and unfortunately that player got really, really flooded in game 1. And then game 2 I just put a bunch of counters on things with Luvac, so not really worth going over that game. But in round 2, I did end up playing against a deck that was probably better than mine, or at least more consistent than mine. It's hard for a deck not to be more consistent than this, though, right? Like, look at this mana base. Though we were playing another 3-color deck, we were playing against an Esper deck, lots of flyers. And yeah, we did not have very many powerful cards to deal with flyers. The opponent had a playtest blue-black land that enters tapped, and you can pay 2 mana to like turn it into like a Rogue's Gloves, an equipment that says like when equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and you can equip for 2. But it only does that until end of turn, so you have to like pay 4 mana basically every time you want to do that. But still, really good ability on a land, especially for limited, a dual land at that. So the opponent had a bunch of flyers, and like you might have noticed here, we do not interact with flyers very well. I have like Obelisk Spider that does a pretty good job, but I think the opponent had like a Deep Freeze or something to get the spider out of the way. I ended up having to use a Living Death here, and I was down to like 2 life. That said, even though I did wrath the opponent's board of flyers in game 1, I think I only got back like Swarm of Locusts. So potentially I could have sequenced things a little better, maybe chump blocked an extra time or 2, but it's pretty difficult to chump block with ground creatures when your opponent's attacking with flyers. So probably didn't make too many mistakes there. And then despite being at 2 life and building a stable board pretty quickly, my opponent did end up killing me. I think they had Exsanguinate to drain me out, and yeah, there's just nothing I can do about that. This can give a creature protection from something, cannot give a player protection from something, and even if it could, I would be going to 0 life to cast it. Didn't have the Birds in Paradise in play to produce the white mana, so that wasn't going to work. Game 2 against this deck, I did have a sideboard plan, so I brought in Azuri's Archers, which is 1 mana 1/2 reach, but when it blocks a creature with flying, gets +3/+0 until end of turn. My idea basically being like, okay, well I can't interact with their stuff, I have to have some bad cards, so once again the Dead Reveler was removed. And I had to mulligan on the play, so I was feeling pretty bad about how things were going. Lots of awkward keeps with this deck. The mana base and the high curve really don't mix well in terms of opening hands. Things like Lay of the Land, Farseek, Birds of Paradise obviously make hands great. That's why it was important for me to have like 10 green sources. But like I mentioned, I never did draw the birds. Sometimes I drew the Lay of the Land or the Farseek, but not as often as I would have liked. Lots of games with Pyramid early, and that is not ideal mana fixing. So game 2, I did end up curving Azuri's Archers into, I believe, Frogkin Kidnapper, and I looked at my opponent's hand, and I exiled their Baleful Strix, which would have been a really nice blocker for them. So then I went 1-drop, 2-drop, and then I think turn 3 I played Swarm of Locusts. I think I may have been missing a land, probably not. And then I had like Pyramid to follow it up, I believe, the turn after that. So Just about the cheapest curve I could get. Could have gotten something a little more aggressive if I had drawn the Rancor, but not exactly going to complain about a mulligan on the play where I get to disrupt my opponent. Also, my opponent was missing land drops. Baleful Strix was like a super important card for them. They couldn't like return it to their hand anytime soon. Opponent did end up having a 3-mana 2/3 flyer. I think it has Cloud in the name. I don't remember the other word though. And oh, I think it's just Cloud Elemental. And yeah, 3-mana 2/3 flyer, but can only block creatures with flying. So they could stonewall my Swarm of Locusts, but my Kidnapper and my Izuri's Archers got to keep hitting them for damage. So that was a really important part of my game plan, and fortunately I got them all the way down to 4 life, and I was able to finish them off with a couple hits of the heavy Arbalest. And then game 3, I was feeling anything but confident. I don't think my deck is very strong, or at least I didn't in general. Like I have to draw really well, and being on the draw seems like a pretty big disadvantage. But fortunately, in game 3, I believe I found a timely blue source for a Squidnapper after I was really far behind on board. And then I think I stole my opponent's Baleful Strix, and then they had like a Shipwrecked Singer in play. But I was like pressuring their life total pretty decently. And I also had Luvac in play. So Luvac started putting counters on a bunch of things. And I think I might have had Rancor at this point as well. And I just got to start making some really huge attacks. I believe, oh yeah, so I believe that was the game where my opponent played the white 4-mana 2/4 that when it enters the battlefield you become the Monarch. So I was able to steal the Monarch pretty quickly and retain that. So every end of turn I'm like putting a counter on something and then drawing an extra card off the Monarch. So really, snowballing like crazy. The Monarch is a very strong mechanic, but fortunately I was able to Squidnap my way into stealing that. I think that's when I drew the blue source, actually, the second one for that Squidnapper. And yeah, I think that was pretty much that. Just an overwhelming advantage of having Luvac in play for a bunch of turns. I believe that one, I think I won that on extra turn 0. Like we went to time in game 3 there, and I managed to claw my way out of that. But on to round 3 now. So I knew my opponent's deck was going to be a powerful red-green deck. The players I had passed to, who I thought had some of the strongest decks, just because I thought I had done such a bad job drafting, because I just took so many playtest cards and passed so many good cards, again, like Icy Manipulator and Shriekmaw, that just would have been bonkers in my deck. They did say that this player had a very good deck, and obviously we were in the finals for a reason, so I was pretty prepared for some crazy stuff to go down. In game 1, I believe they were just playing a pretty aggressive game plan. Nothing off the top of my head that was completely crazy. I think they had lots of nicely statted green creatures, not tons of removal, but I do think that I got to kill one thing with Hunter of Eyeblights, and then they like turned another creature into something that was renowned, so it had a couple +1/+1 counters on it. And I think I was using Rancor defensively this game. So I was going to try to use that Hunter to kill another one of their creatures with +1/+1 counters on it, but unfortunately the Hunter got killed before I could do that. So that was kind of my whole game plan. Can't really block a 6/6 trample without using the Hunter to kill it. So at that point I had only a couple outs, Living Death or Squidnapper, and unfortunately I did not draw either. So I ended up dying to that 6/6 trample. I think it's Rocks something, and it might be from like Magic Origins, something like that. But really nice green 5-drop. Doesn't line up well against the Hunter, but if you kill the Hunter, then you got it. So then game 2, I was thinking, okay, well, I probably need to try to board in something a little more relevant, like Dead Reveler. is a nice card, can be aggressive if I need it to be, but I'm not really a very aggressive deck. I can't really leverage that, and Territorial Baloth is a pretty nice size. It can trade with things pretty well. And so that was the swap I ended up making there. And then we had a pretty interesting game where I think we both had decently aggressive draws. Once again, I had the Swarm of Locusts beating down, but my opponent had a pretty early, I think turn 3 or so, Gore Clan Rampager, something like that. Or no. What happened was I played Frogkin Kidnapper, looked at their hand, and I saw the Gore Clan Rampager, which is almost worse. It's already a really good card, really flexible and strong. Either rate is great, but seeing it with the Kidnapper basically prevented me from blocking the whole game, because with that Frogkin Kidnapper, I now knew that they had that +4/+4 trick that was available to them whenever they had 5 mana available, right? Because you pay 3 to return the Rampager to your hand, and then you pay 2 to like Rampage it or whatever. Is it Blood Rush? Something like that. I think it's Blood Rush. So we were just chunking each other. I kept suiting up the Rancor on my creatures, and they kept having smaller creatures that were somehow capable of trading, which was really annoying for me. I had Hunter of Eyeblights for a bunch of turns, but I couldn't play it. Then I don't remember exactly how I got out of that one. I don't think the Arbalest did it. I think I had the Arbalest in game 1 and it wasn't good enough. I think I had it on like Swarm of Locusts, and I used it to like chump block while I was like shooting down another attacker, and then yeah, that's how I died to that 6/6 trample. Chump blocking a trampler with a 1 toughness creature, not a very fun thing to do, but sometimes you gotta do it. Okay, so I think what happened was I had the Rancor and I was able to suit up my Swarm of Locusts, and my opponent was almost dead to that. I think what happened was they were at like 5 life, and that thing attacks for 4. And then I had Squidnapper. I had Squidnapped something of theirs, I believe. Yeah, I think it was the 6/9 Trample card from Innistrad. Don't remember its name, but only 6 mana for a 6/9 Trample, but you do need to exile 2 things from your graveyard when you cast it. I think Scap Goliath is probably the name, or maybe Scob. And then what happened was I was finally able to kick that Kavu Primarch, but I had to tap the Squidnapper, which left me in pretty precarious shape, because I believe I was at 6 life, so I needed to have at least 1 blocker in play, and I could not afford, there's no way for me to have like 2 blockers that let me kick the Primarch. So potentially it could have been worth playing around like 1 removal spell, and that means I shouldn't have kicked the Primarch, but it felt like it was the right play because I did have a 7/7 against the opponent's 6/9 trample that they got back from the Squidnapper, and so that seemed like it was going to be the best way to soak up damage, play around like Gore Clan, even though I guess they had already used that, but still playing around similar effects. And I did manage to win that game, fortunately. And then game 3, now this one was for all marbles, of course, and it's a pack per win, so, you know, not exactly low stakes, really exciting stuff. And I was feeling not very good about things. I kept a pretty clunky hand, I believe, as usual, for this deck. Just once I would have loved to have led on turn 1 Birds of Paradise. That's not how things went. I did keep the Territorial Baloth in, by the way, over that Dead Reveler. Opponent had a very aggressive early start, and they had, I think this is the game where they had turn 3 Gore Clan Rampager, and that means basically 4/4 trample trying to beat me down. I did have the Swarm of Locusts again to try to race them, but that wasn't going super well because, I mean, 2/1 flyer versus 4/4 trample, pretty clear who's winning that race. And then eventually, I think it was turn 5, I was able to play Thornhide Wolves, and I like top decked land number 5 to be able to do it. So I was able to brick wall their Gore Clan Rampager for a bit there, but the opponent added a ton of creatures to the board. One of them was the Valakut Invoker, 3 mana, 2/3. You pay 8 and it deals 3 damage to any target. And again, with like no removal in my deck, that card is an enormous problem. So I ended up basically deciding I needed to kill it with Hunter of Eyeblights. Problem is, like, it wasn't the most threatening body ever, right? Just a 2/3. So putting a counter on it, turning it into a 3/4, as opposed to like killing something like a 4/4, or at least trying to kill something like a 4/4 with the Hunter of Eyeblights, was pretty scary. And scarier still is the fact that when I did it, my opponent was on 7 mana, which meant that they could just play a land if they had one, activate that Valakut Invoker, kill the Hunter of Eyeblights. Or so it seemed. Because I actually had Apostle's Blessing, and I think I cast Apostle's Blessing one other time. I think my round 2 opponent like double blocked my Squidnapper, and I was able to cast Apostle's Blessing to like kill their Hypnotic Spectre and like save my Squidnapper, which was obviously super important and easily could have gotten me blown out, but I think I had to go for it. And yeah, this time the opponent was in the tank for a bit, then realized that they could play a land, activate that Invoker, try to kill the Hunter, and of course I was ready with my Apostle's Blessing. So they didn't deal 3 damage to anything, but I did lose a couple life to the Blessing. So now in a relatively precarious position, I think around 10 life or so. But I did get to untap and kill that Invoker, and the other important thing about that was I gave my Hunter protection from red, which means the opponent did not have a good attack that turn either. And then from there, I was able to build into a really nice winning board position with opportunity, and feeling really good about things. I think I might have had Luvac going as well. Oh yeah, I didn't mention this, but my round 2 opponent had a Wrath. I think it was Deadly Tempest or something like that. Something like 7 mana, destroy everything, then each player loses life equal to the number of creatures they control. So I think my opponent lost like 1 life when that happened in round 2, and I lost like 5, and like my whole board was gone. But I had extremely fortunately Wander in Death and enough mana to get back Luvac and Squidnapper. And yeah, I think that was how I won game 3. So I actually overcame the Wrath in game 3 of round 2, but unfortunately cannot say the same for game 3 of round 3. So after I had opportunity and really set up my board, gone into a great position, I believe my opponent had a card called Planequake, playtest card, X and a red, deals X damage to each creature without flying. I believe there's some other text on there as well, but the important part is they were able to play their 6/9 trample once again, able to sweep away my entire board except for the Swarm of Locusts suited up with a Rancor, which in general did seem pretty strong, but there's just nothing I could do about a 6/9 trample. I did have a couple outs at that point. Once again, those very powerful 5 mana cards with 2 pips. So I could have drawn Squidnapper, and that would have at least bought me some time, if not straight up won me the game, with that Swarm of Locusts with Rancor on it crashing in. Or I could have drawn Living Death, and I believe Living Death would have been just a game win for me, because could have caused some bad stuff to happen, like the Hunter of Eyeblights is coming back, the Invoker's coming back, so I have to worry about that interaction again. But the opponent exiled 2 creatures to that Scab Goliath, so maybe the Invoker wasn't coming back. Don't totally remember that part, but the important thing is I believe Living Death was a win. I believe Squidnapper could have been a win, especially at the top of my library was kind to me. But I had already cast Opportunity. I had already removed all the brick counters from Sunset Pyramid, and I was just kind of desperately staring at that 6/9 nice body. And yeah, there's really nothing I could do. So yeah, super, super fun draft. Had a blast playing. Again, not very often that you can just draft which in my opinion, I did really, really poorly, and then still do really well, like coming down to game 3, almost going to time again. Really, really close matches and just good magic. The one thing I will say about this format, so Chaos, one of the reasons I love Chaos is because I love skimming cards. I love trying to understand what something does and how good it is without enough time to make the choice, like particularly on Magic Online with those clocks. Something stressful about it, but also really, really fun. Unfortunately, not really an experience I have much of anymore because I kind of know what all the cards do at this point. So, it's pretty rare that I actually have to read a card, let alone multiple cards in a pack. With the exception of playtest cards, right? Those cards are, new to most people. Most people know like maybe the 2 most expensive cards from the playtest set, but there are a lot of playtest cards. And that's actually one thing I really enjoyed about this format. So the Mystery Booster format on Magic Online, I actually strongly disliked that format. The rares showed up way, way too often, the same rares did. And without, the playtest cards and with it being like a phantom format, you really lose out on like most of the fun of the whole thing. So huge improvement, in my opinion, over the Magic Online version of the Mystery Booster events. But now one last piece, which is the financial piece. So not a ton of fun in general entering an event like this. I imagine Wizards would say something like, oh, this kind of event isn't for everyone. And I have always hated language like that, even if it's true. And one of my problems with this too is I was so preoccupied with trying to draft expensive cards that I didn't just try to draft a good deck, right? Like, I nearly won the draft. I made it to the finals of round 3, played pretty well. I think I made some mistakes, but really not ones that mattered. Just imagine how things would have gone for me if instead of trying to take the most expensive card, I tried to read the signals and take the best card out of every pack. So if you're financially in a better spot than I am, and you don't have to be preoccupied with what is expensive or what might be expensive, then this format is almost guaranteed to be a blast for you. But if you're like me and you're wondering, okay, is this card $10? Is this card going to stay $10, or is it going to drop a ton? Like, what's going to happen? Is it worth drafting them? That's really not the kind of stress and like time pressure that I enjoy. I enjoy time pressure when it's card evaluation, not like financial evaluation. So I might not be drafting this format again just because of that. If I could draft this format without the playtest cards, just something to make this format a little less expensive, so like the store edition instead of convention edition or whatever, then I think I'd be all over it, because I'm really more interested in the sweet limited format, playing cool cards that you don't get to see very often, than I am in taking a bunch of playtest cards. But, I was still very happy with this experience, would recommend it in general, but keep in mind that caveat that if, like me, you get a little sidetracked by price, you won't have maybe as good of a time as you could have. So with that, thank you all for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed this draft, had a blast. Really a great time to be back in an LGS. Not sure how long that's going to last, but it's been a while for me, and it was really just a great time meeting everybody. So hope you all are able to enjoy a similar experience, and I'll see you next time.